The crowdsourcing has gotten so advanced that there's companies where you actually have workers who are labeling boxes, who are highlighting text, who are finding these images in images. And it's amazing to see how that's evolved. My question is, how important do you see crowdsourcing moving forward to getting AI to a steady state that will be good enough for us to use for consumers?
I think it will be continue to be very important. As I said, for the work that we're doing at Talkspace, we don't crowdsource outside of the company. We just hire an army of interns to come in and code anonymized transcripts so that we can look at, build models to learn to identify emotions or other sort of very therapeutic specific concepts. And I see that we're going to continue to need that for the foreseeable future. Hopefully we can start to need less and less, but I don't see it going away totally.
So I mean, certainly in like my area, most funds are pretty secretive, so crowdsourcing is a big no-no. But but it's a great question because every institution generates a lot of internal data, and that internal data starts out very messy. And so it's less thinking about necessarily crowdsourcing, but creating a culture of structuring that data. So instead of just writing out an idea, like maybe give it some quantitative metrics that you can label it. Outside of that, I think what would be an excellent form of crowdsourcing is something like what NYAI is trying, where you encrypt your data and you let it loose, and you let data scientists from around the world work with it, and kind of see how those results track. So that's a different form of crowdsourcing, but I think a little more applicable to the type of work.
And for those who don't know, NYAI is a venture, I think, in California that's part of a fund system that if you outperform the stock market, you get paid, and it's like a cryptocurrency payout. But super fascinating how all the data is secure. Catherine?
I mean, I think I'm less biased on this than people think I should be, but I really think crowdsourcing is going to have to be continually more important and continue to be important. I mean, I think all in all, we have ways of learning with less data, but I think that having a human loop at some point is going to be important as we tackle more difficult tasks. I think sort of crowdsourcing will continue to move to the tasks that are harder as we move forward. But I see a lot of, especially in financial services, I see a lot of what you're talking about, where people are restructuring the entire way that they annotate and take notes when they're making deals and they're making trades in a way that they're building essentially an internal crowdsourced system for training AIs. And I think that this is great. And a lot of different practices are coming out and saying, hey, at least to me as a consultant, how do we start doing this kind of thing? How do we figure this out? And I think it's going to be really important. So I think it just keeps evolving.
Beginning to try to make your products explainable and understandable with the AI.
So that's something that we are actively working on, because a lot of what my team does is build tools that are designed to support and help the therapist working on our platform and make recommendations perhaps for how, what technique or what intervention to use with a particular client. But just like doctors, therapists are not going to just take, they're highly trained professionals. They want to know why are you telling me this? So they really need to have some amount of explanation for why some model is telling them to use more emotional warmth in their interaction. So that's been something that we're working on. It's not always easy. If you find the words or the phrases that got the most weight in your very complicated a deep neural network, and then how do you show that in a meaningful way to a therapist and have them find it valuable and believable?
Let's just switch up the order a little bit on that one. I think that I don't have one company, right? I work with a lot of different companies in a lot of different ways, and I think we're only at the very beginning of explainable AI, and what also gets said is human-centric AI, right? Which is the idea that we're both going to design AI for people to use it, and we're going to design AI to benefit people, and I think both of those things are really important. When I say we're only at the beginning of explainable AI, it's because there's a lot of research that's being done. If you're really interested in this, there's a great conference called NYAI. It's an ACM conference. That's, at this point, it's about user interfaces and AI, and at this point, it's about 50% explainability this year, because it's such a big deal. And a lot of those papers are really interesting because they talk about when explainable AI doesn't work, right? If you're explaining something and you don't do a good job in a different way, it actually comes out worse than if you hadn't explained anything at all for the user. And certain times there's a trade-off between explainability and accuracy. And there's also, interestingly, increasingly, and I'm not going to give away where this is coming from, this is a different researcher, it might be interesting to look at the idea of how working together with an AI and accuracy work together. You know, maybe we're just testing for AIs that make decisions by themselves, and we don't design for AIs that we work together with a person to design for them. So there's really interesting work that people from behavioral science are starting to work on as well in that area. So I think we're really at the tip of the iceberg here, because I think it's very easy to mess up explainable AI, and we don't really understand what works for people. So we need to think about this as a UI design problem rather than an AI problem.
Outside of the human-computer interaction facet, where a lot of us data scientists and software engineers sit, we sometimes have trouble describing these AI models to decision makers, right? Because they don't necessarily need to know all the weights, all the bias inputs, all those things. But unless you kind of start listing them out, all you really have to fall back on is, I ran this and this was my output. And that leaves us in kind of like a silly state. But until we really understand more of like how a neural net, for example, is doing what it's doing, we won't be able to explain it. It's just put your faith in it.
I think one really fun thing to remember is that people are bad at explainability on our own actions. It's psychology research says that people, if you test what people's rationale is for doing something when they're doing it, the rationale they give afterwards is sometimes much more coherent. So we're definitely holding machines to a different standard than we hold ourselves, and maybe that's good.